Day 2 of the 11th SA AIDS conference in Durban got underway today. The theme on acting, connecting and ending the epidemic was carried out through the different symposiums. Gender-based violence was in the spotlight today, with data indicating it's reached chronic levels affecting women and other vulnerable groups, including key populations. Studies show a bidirectional relationship between gender-based violence and HIV, exposing further risks, particularly for vulnerable populations. We're joined now by Professor Salim Abdool Karim, the Director of the Center for the AIDS Program of Research in South Africa. Dr. Karim, good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Firstly, let's talk about the emerging challenges that South Africa is facing in its fight against HIV/AIDS.
Good evening, Kathy, and good evening to all of your viewers. We are really at a point where we have not reached the targets that the United Nations and UNAIDS had set for the whole world. There are only a few countries that met the 2020 target of 90-90-90. That's 90% of those who have HIV should know their status, and 90% of them should be on treatment, and 90% of them should be viral load suppressed. So because we've missed that target, we've got to rededicate our efforts and try to increase and put new energy into increasing the number of individuals who are on treatment, and that's our highest priority. That's not going to be enough. We're going to have to do better also in prevention. And it's it's dealing with both the treatment and the prevention challenges at the same time that has to be our focus over the next 2 years as we head for the 2025 targets to meet them for the UN goal of ending AIDS by the year 2030.
New energy to fight a disease where one gets the sense that there's a general fatigue around HIV/AIDS campaigns around the disease have also just subsided. And I suppose the COVID-19 pandemic has not helped the cause much on this front, but certainly one gets the sense that the momentum coming out of the pandemic has been very slow to pick up.
Yeah, you hit it on the head. I mean, we really have seen a slowing down of interest, commitment, and dedication and resources that previously were available for HIV. It's just not the same in the post-COVID period or in this period as we come out of the COVID pandemic. What we have seen that COVID has done several things. The first is that during the lockdown period, when we were in level 5 and level 4, we saw a decrease in the number of HIV patients who were going in for their medication. We saw a decrease in the amount of HIV testing. We saw a decrease in the number of people who were seeking to know whether they were virally suppressed. So all of those have a long-term impact in that even though we've overcome those gaps now, mostly, we still now, it means that we've lost that 2 years or so, that we should have been progressing. Instead, we were just managed to stay static. So that's our first problem. The second is that HIV is no longer in the public's eye in the way it was pre-COVID. And the third is that the new resources becoming available are now being dedicated more broadly to pandemic preparedness rather than to any one particular disease. So it's that combination of challenges that we are grappling with in relation to COVID-19 in order to meet our targets for HIV.
Of course, having a sort of broad funding waters down the kind of impact that organizations like yourselves can have in any particular sector. It's not just HIV, Prof. Karim. Tuberculosis and some of the figures around TB are also quite alarming, not only when it comes to accessing treatment. We know the story about drug-resistant TB, multi-drug-resistant TB, and that's something that's also sort of slipped under the radar, worse so, post the pandemic.
Yes, you're right. I mean, we saw not just that HIV took a knock in the early stages of the COVID pandemic, but TB just as much as well. And part of our problem is that when patients are not collecting and taking their TB treatment, it then leads to a situation where we see increases in drug-resistant TB, which is much more difficult to treat. And that's part of the challenge that we are dealing with in South Africa. So if you look now at our high priorities in terms of infectious disease, they remain that we still are seeing a large number of new cases of HIV, and so that remains a high priority for us. Second is tuberculosis, which is still one of our biggest killers in South Africa. And thirdly, we need to be preparing for the next pandemic. Coronaviruses or whatever comes next, whether it's influenza, we've got to be ready for that. So we've got to split our resources, we've got to split our energy, we've got to do all three things.
What are you hoping will come out of this conference?
I'm hoping that we'll see two things come out of it. The first is I hope we'll see a recommitment and rebuilding some of that spirit that came from all sectors of society, communities, scientists, pharmaceutical companies, healthcare providers, coming to one mind and standing together united against HIV. And the second is I hope we'll see the continuation and the recommitment of existing resources to HIV. And our biggest concern always is one of our biggest funders for HIV care and treatment is the U.S. government, and to ensure that they continue their commitment over the next several years as we go in through that last mile of trying to get to the United Nations targets.
Are you worried that funding may be under threat given the current relations that South Africa seems to have with the U.S. and questions around, that relationship?
Yeah, quite concerned. I'm quite concerned for two reasons. One is, South Africa's equivocation about whether it has indeed sold arms to Russia, and if that is the case, I mean, that puts us in a very precarious position in relation to the U.S., which is arming the Ukraine. So I see that as a real threat to the potential and the future of this program. But the second is, just internal U.S. politics, always plays itself out, and that conservatives, always want to link any international aid to abortion or anti-abortion programs. And so I'm always concerned that PEPFAR might become a casualty of internal ideological differences across the aisle in the two major parties in the U.S. government.
And we know how significant PEPFAR has been for South Africa. Thank you, Professor Salim Abdool Karim.